there's no global consensus on how to grow weed, let alone incentivize people to grow it correctly. You have to not just build these things, but define them for the first time as well.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Dime. I'm Brian Fields, and with me, as always, is Kellen Finney. And this week, we've got a very special guest, Mike Siebold, managing partner of FlowerHire. Mike, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing today?
Oh, guys, I'm so excited. I'm so caffeinated. I'm sweating. I'm actually pretty pumped because I am a long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you. Kellen, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Really excited to talk to Mike. Really excited to jump into hiring and the cannabis industry. And I'm excited that we have a fellow West Coast guy on the podcast again. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing great and short. Maybe Mike is currently located in the West Coast, but I think it's important when we understand where someone's roots are is where does their family live and where do they go to undergraduate school? So Mike, just for the record, could you answer both those questions?
Well, I don't want to get into the middle of a tiff because that's obviously a West Coast, East Coast thing going on pretty much, but I am an East Coast person by birth. And so I am a jaded, cynical person by default, but I moved to Los Angeles. So I've got in touch with a little person named Mike ever since. So thank you for putting me in between your fight. Thank you.
I love it. I love it. So for our listeners and unsure about you, can you give a background about yourself and a little bit about FlowerHire?
Sure. FlowerHire has been around for 2017. So 7 years. And specifically what we do is we partner with cannabis businesses, any size and scope, any stage of their growth trajectory. So what we do specifically and what people know us for is retain and embedded search, strategic talent management, and then HR advisory. The last part, HR advisory, is what I've been focusing on for the last several years. So human capital processes for compliance, performance management, retention, compensation design. What we do is, one, if we find a gap that needs to be filled by talent, we go out and find it if it's not inside industry. And then the thing I do specifically is I get to parachute inside the confines of these businesses and work from the inside out using best practices that we've sourced domestically. So I'm lucky. I get to go wherever these businesses are spinning up, and we're not discerning. It's been every size and scope business imaginable. Multi-state operators, single state, brand, ancillary, law firm. Thankfully, our work not only takes us everywhere, but we get to collaborate with pretty much anyone worthwhile.
I love it. So let's take us inside a conversation. Company reach out to us and says, hey, Mike, we're having this issue. Or is it, hey, Mike, we're trying to be proactive about X? How does that work? And take us through some of those conversations.
It's pretty organic. Oftentimes, at this point, we have enough rapport and relationship with expertise and people with skill. And usually we'll also put people in positions of decision-making where, honestly, if it's on the advisory side, usually it will be is like a theme, right? Like there's something at the business that is, an opportunity for change, or we feel like there's some kind of gap, or, we have a new initiative, we're expanding, or, we have to do a riff, or, there's some circumstance that people are grappling with. And what they really do more than anything else is just not even ask for expertise, but confide it in us first because we have relationships that are longstanding in the space. Now, for people that are new to the ecosystem, the first way that they assess this is always, oh, well, you're a recruitment firm primarily. I have to get, instant offense. I'm building a light depth indoor cultivation site or production facility. I have no idea what to look for. I have no idea what to pay. I have no idea what the career trajectory for that person is going to be. Honestly, I just finished putting my story together, my mission, vision, values. I need to go out and represent myself in marketplace, but I don't know where to start. Usually that's kind of the crux in the inception stage where we start working with businesses to define who they are, what they want to be, go out to marketplace and representing them to bring that talent in so they can propel themselves going forward. But, honestly, when it comes to solving for issues outside the realm of, recruitment and recruitment strategy, it usually is a catalyst of something needs to change somehow. We have been sitting on something, or frankly, we are so busy blocking and tackling, trying to keep our business, in a pace and trajectory that is growth oriented. Some of these things have fallen by the wayside, and we want someone to come in and maybe calibrate or change them for us. Would you like to take a look? HR is actually a great place to start because oddly enough, that's where most of the data for most of these businesses lives and exists and perpetuates. It's where you have insight into what people are doing, what they're controlling, what their spans of control are. It also is a great way to see firsthand if a business has been thoughtful and methodical about not just what they're trying to accomplish, but also in the way that they're growing, right? Growth management in cannabis is a slipshod process. And if you're a first-time founder, in any respect, forget, just in cannabis, but in manufacturing at large, it's very disorienting to prepare yourself for a marketplace that is going to be hopefully receptive to your brand or your product or your service. But most importantly, as management, how am I going to make sure that my story is compelling enough to keep people in place, to keep them enticed, to keep them informed, to keep their mindset in the place where they can know that you have their interests at heart. So what we try to do as much as possible is have free-ranging conversations like this about very simplistic themes. What are you trying to accomplish and how can we get you there? Usually that opens up to a really candid conversation about what is going right, what is going wrong. And then by virtue of that, maybe other things worth considering.
So initially, FlowerHire didn't have like an HR arm that they supported. Was this just basically developed out of necessity when you guys were interacting with a lot of your current clientele? And was it just part of the natural evolution and maturity of the cannabis industry and you just saw the need? Kind of talk us through why this evolution within FlowerHire occurred.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not scientific at all. I mean, you think about it, you have a conversation with the firm. Again, we find somebody with a skill set, a mindset, a personality, an appetite for risk. We put them into that business. And because of, trust, they turn to us and say, I have to hire for this role. I have no idea what to pay for this person. So it started out as themes, right? We just started seeing themes, but on a recurring basis proved out to be gaps. And so, I turned to everyone, on staff and I said, well, why don't we try to solve for it? I mean, we know people who have built business before that have tackled these issues before. Best practices to solve for these issues, they're not IP bound. And most importantly, we should be able to, redirect resources and find best practices to put into conversation with people so they don't have to live and breathe, with the anxiety of not being able to solve this issue comprehensively. So that's how it started. People would turn to us and tell us there's something here. And when we started to systemize it, like inequity, compensation, org design, org planning, career arc and career trajectory for people, we started saying to ourselves, well, why we have data, we have experience, we have expertise, we have know-how. Why don't we systemize it? And that actually coincided with me meeting with my partner, Jason DeSense, who is a freak show of an HR professional. He, is a auto guy. He's a global HR leader. He was one of the founding members of Gage Cannabis before TerraSend. He was actually part of Skymint. He resigned before it went Kalui. The interesting thing about him was we had been introduced to a mutual colleague. And I said, well, you have all this expertise and, you have seen scale and scope that I can't even fathom. Would you want to come, get into some trouble and maybe create systems architecture with me? And you know what, would you want to, jump into these scenarios alongside me to right size and reorient some of these businesses? So we've been going hand in hand ever since the last 2 years because of the fact that people were trusting with us about talking about their problems. We decided to just try and solve them. And that really is kind of the crux of it.
It has to be such a complicated balance talking about the growth management, just given the fact of how quickly the industry is moving and how quickly some of these organizations are hiring, to think about doubling and then having to redo the organizational structure. Is there a single element that these companies typically struggle in, or is it a variety of ones? They just haven't thought through the process of, okay, we were 5, we were set up like this, now we became 10, we barely adjusted, and now we're 25 and 30, and we haven't reorganized. How does that work?
A lot of it is just the basic truth that it's a luxury to step back out of, your growth trajectory to even think about the things that you could be trying to do better. I mean, most of the time, let's think for a second if you're one of the founding members of these companies, right? And let's just say that you're in a place like Ohio or Missouri, right? The horse run, you're going. You're doing exceptionally well. But as it goes, you start seeing the mechanics kind of break down a little bit. And it takes a lot of know-how, knowledge, and honesty to step back and say, am I the person equipped or enabled to solve for that? And so there's not one overarching issue, I would say. I would say inequity, right? Like titling, I would say, is pretty consistent. Compensation design, bonus programming, like there's no global consensus on how to grow weed, let alone incentivize people to grow it correctly. You have to not just build these things, but define them for the first time as well. A lot of these founders are not just building a cannabis business, they're building a business fundamentally, right? In the macro climate. They also have to tackle what is inherently, every time they go into a new market for the first time or they're in a new market, an orientation that is disassociative. You have to completely change the paradigm of thinking if you're in 4 different marketplaces, right? What is permissible, allowed, and the dynamic of your team can be hindered or can be better than what you were expecting. So truth be told, a lot of these businesses, it's not that they're falling prey to their own mistakes. A lot of times it's a luxury to even know that the mistakes are there to begin with. It's not usually until they become very acute that people start calling in, people like us or similar groups to start talking about it in full. So it's not one uniform issue that's really pervasive. Truth be told, it's an annualized kind of experience. If you're being thoughtful about your business, you should be sitting down with all your managers, your department head, anyone that has a discipline other than yourself, that's, a named executive officer, or even just, even if you're middle management, to sit down and categorically talk about what could be done better. And more importantly, do we have the resources internally or the know-how to solve for it? I think a lot of businesses struggle with that because they're just trying to keep themselves in the straight and narrow, tackling every other problem that you have being a going concern in cannabis. So it takes a lot of strength and a lot of courage to bypass the idea that, well, I built this, I can solve for this because I've been solving for it so far, to say, well, I can't do it better than somebody else potentially. Maybe I need to bring an outside resource.
Do you see a lot of common themes, if you will, within these different business structures, right? Because essentially, right, in different states, you have vertically integrated organizations, right, that have multiple businesses, right? So they'll have an agricultural farming business, they'll have a processing facility, which is a lab, essentially, right? And from an organizational standpoint, those are completely different businesses and need to be managed different. You're going to need to incentivize someone cultivating differently than someone who's a chemist in a lab, differently than a packager, right? So can you kind of describe if there is kind of common themes, organizationally speaking, or if they are kind of tailored to these individual aspects within these companies?
Well, it's a great question because part of me wants to say, well, there's an aspect to our space that's kind of customary. This is how it's typically done. But the real truth is that pretty much everything has to be customized. I mean, if you're being totally transparent about what's required of these businesses, you can't just like superimpose or regurgitate, an org chart on top of any business because that's a processing facility and that's how it's done. Again, the thing to remember is that we are still grappling with the very definitions of the titles we're assigning. We're still grappling with and defining while we're building the ways to drive behaviors by virtue of incentivizing for people growing something that was grown clandestinely up until very recently, right? Like you're asking also, and the thinking is like, well, we have this expertise and this knowledge and this know-how. These people have experience and skill. True, that doesn't make them managers. It's different. It's one thing to grow weed at scale. It's another thing to be a good manager, to listen to your people and their issues and be equipped and enabled to progressively make a better work environment for them, right? So a lot of it is also the fact that cannabis is great at defining the characteristics of what these businesses look like. But the training and development, right, the mobility of skill that is necessary to kind of create this uniform process, it's not there. Cannabis is not a uniform thing because it doesn't grow uniformly. I mean, you guys know this firsthand, and you have all of these great people that speak to this. This is not a singular industry. I mean, I catch a lot of shade and a lot of flack for this, but it really is not an industry just yet. It's more like a series of informal economies, right? And the way that you are a cultivation manager for a like-depth indoor facility versus a saw-and-tooth 40-acre greenhouse, that's a completely different dynamic. Same title, entirely different skill set, entirely different managerial demands, entirely different bonus programming. So again, customary, customized. Every time we talk to a group, we start from a foundational place, which is let's talk about what you are trying to accomplish. And what we will do is talk about an approach, right? And a process. And we'll talk about structure and format based off businesses similar to yours. We will never just take what has been done before and put it on top of your business. That is kind of sloppy and it's very slipshod. What we try to do as much as possible is talk about what is this market going to be like? This facility that you're creating, what is the dynamic going to be? Is it going to be pumping, throughput 24/7 all the time? Or is it going to be, I think, Kellen, you're in Colorado. Is it going to be like a chia pet where it has basically created equilibrium and maybe it's a bit of a downslope? It's a different situation each time. So I think that the thing that I always try to tell people is don't just take what has been done for granted where you are or where you're going for any sort of business just because it's cannabis. What you really need to do from a foundational element is really qualify and then quantify your process and then work from that place versus just saying, well, that's how it's usually done. There is no usual, right? There is no usual whatsoever.
You think it has to do ego related, just inexperience, or just from the mere fact of some of these people here are just going as fast as humanly possible and be like, hey, change is scary because we've done something one way. And if we evolve, I am unsure if I'm going to feel comfortable with the new environment.
I think it's all of the above. I mean, I will never be able to say inherently that it was ego that was the thing that, made a business precipitously decline. Usually it's a business has gotten to a place, some shape or fashion, good or bad, or indifferent, right? Sometimes it's just like a business that's kind of like static. It's neither growing nor is it declining. And there's a decision that has to be made because they want to break through a fourth wall. They want to basically do something that is going to be better for the entirety of the business. Usually it's like, if we expand, what would that look like? Where would we go, right? It's hard to say really if it's founder syndrome. That's the pervasive issue. Like, I started this from the get-go. I was the person that created the business. I'm the person that found the capital. I'm the person that's brought the expertise together. I'm the person that knows what's best for the business. I mean, that's just an experience any business in America. A lot of people just don't want to give up the control because they work so hard to gain it in the first place. And I can respect that. Absolutely. What I've noticed to be really beneficial, though, is people in positions to influence or control who surround themselves not just with smart people in and around their C-suite or their managerial ranks, but also a mentorship group. Like usually what I find a thing that helps kind of find benefit for people is when they talk to people who have experienced these problems elsewhere and qualified them in real time and bouncing them off. So there's a check against the idea of having an egotistical bent, but it's really hard to say. Usually what it is it's first time. You're really experiencing it for the first time in some shape or fashion, and you're trying to come to grips with what this could be, what this is meaning, and you're trying to make a decision based off of that. It's kind of opaque or unclear, right? The market dynamics. Well, there's price compression. Well, how severe is it? How significant is it? The spot market just fell off, or I just lost a number of people to a competitor. Do I need to rehire the 3 people I lost, or is one person going to solve for it? A lot of people don't grapple with those issues or instances in their daily existence. And if this is your first time into a manufacturing experience, you might have no idea how to solve for it whatsoever. So it's a spectrum, I would say. It's all of the above.
So before you mention inequity, can you just quickly define what that is for any listeners maybe unsure of exactly what that word means?
Sure. Inequity specifically is when the value proposition that someone derives for themselves, primarily through base, bonus, and equity, is inconsistent. And by inconsistent, I mean it's incorrect, or it's malformed, or it's misshaped, or it's ill-defined. Again, with cannabis, it's not like nefarious where people are trying to not pay people enough for a job that they are. They're really qualifying the job for the first time in real time often. So they don't necessarily know themselves, what is the pay grade for a director of processing, right? When I talk about an equity pool for management, how much? How do I distribute it? Is it RSUs versus options, right? When it comes to bonus programming for cultivation, do I just bonus my cultivation team off yield long-term, right? Grow it and we'll get it out the door and we will give you, 30% of your salary, or it'll be over 100%. Truth be told, it's inequity exists in cannabis because the space is still coming to grips as it defines itself. And so inequity is very pervasive because these jobs, these titles in these places, that's the thing, these destinations, these locales, these, because of NIMBY laws, because of not in my backyard, you have, these businesses that are coming to these areas that are being resuscitated, that have not had manufacturing or processing jobs, anything remotely resembling this quite some time. Great. You have this great cultivation site in Las Vegas, New Mexico. What's the cost of living adjustment if you live in Las Vegas, New Mexico? What's the talent pool there, right? These considerations are the sorts of things that people grapple with. So inequity is very pervasive, where value is being derived for the business, but sometimes and oftentimes the people in the role and the position are not deriving as much value as they think for themselves. It's a very pervasive issue, but again, it's not a self-inflicted tendency. I think it's the fact that we are, again, as a group, being very honest about the fact that we are still defining each of these parameters in real time. It's an imperfect science. It's not wrong. It's just kind of odd or weird. But, we've stepped into businesses that have been around for years on end where you have to reassess it even when you feel like it's right, because macro climate, cost of living, just generally, inflation, you have to keep tabs on it even when you got it right the first time. So ultimately, it's a theme, it's a process, it's an experience that you have to keep coming back to on an annualized basis, no matter what. In cannabis, again, huge luxury to think that it's an issue until it comes up into your face. But for us, we always try to address it first because it is one of the more pervasive issues we've seen, for sure.
And the best way for business owners to mitigate that is to just kind of revisit it annually and just like kind of recalibrate and do the whole thing annually. Is that kind of the best advice that you provide business owners when they're trying to mitigate this kind of issue within their organization?
Absolutely. Because, what's on the opposite side if you are not thinking about this topic, this process, this experience? You start to lose people. And by virtue of that, you lose progress, and oftentimes when you lose key people and key roles, you don't only lose process. You also lose trust, faith, hope. Sometimes middle managers that are stellar at what they do have been saying, I need more money, not because I'm piggish. I have a young family to support, or I send money home. I'm going to night school. I'm getting accreditation after hours at night school, right? Like oftentimes people in positions that are on this career arc that are very good at what they do are asking for more. And the business orientation is like, well, we'll get to that. We're going to just kind of put it off. We'll come back to that end of the quarter or the second quarter, or we don't have review until 6 months from now. And then they leave. And you try to fill that void with someone who is as committed, as sincere, as real, and that also has as much loyalty. And that's very hard to replicate. So if you are not doing it and thinking about it on a progressive basis, it doesn't have to be annualized, but you should think about it as much as you can. You start the prospect of losing people to a competitor, or they just go outside marketplace. Labor market in America is white hot, baby. It was 3-4% unemployed. Now it's about 4-1. Best labor market years on end. Lots of people, manufacturing, production, processing, logistics. You can go back to legacy industry outside of cannabis and get a great job because there's not enough of a labor supply. So again, it's something that needs to be visited as a topic on a recurring basis, because your competitors inside this space are going to be looking after your best people, and the competitors outside this space are really going to be looking for them because they're also looking for experience and expertise as well.
I was just going to say, you have to adjust your metrics though, right? Like it hasn't been the most growth-minded industry the last 12 to 18 months within cannabis. So like, is there some sort of a give and take that can be a balance? Is this like where you have to revisit metrics and just be like open from a communication perspective with your employees, being like, hey, this is why it was this way before? Like, how do you tackle that? Is that kind of like par for the course?
Well, a good package or remuneration, the way that you're giving people value is not just only base, bonus, equity. We've seen, appreciation programs, just communication about you being successful and propping you up, training and development. Like oftentimes, it doesn't take a whole lot. Matter of fact, the cost is minimal. Yeah, it's very appreciation alone. Being seen and heard, right? You having communicated with people about trying to make change or improve a process, and then thanking you for it and giving you more title, more responsibility, and pay by virtue of that. Those are components that are the obvious part. I mean, we've seen, what would I call it? Like, total reward programming. Most of the generation that's coming up in cannabis is a younger generation. They have a very different orientation of value than some of the people in the C-suite. Matter of fact, they're dramatically different. And oftentimes when we have instituted programming for their businesses, we say things simple as, well, you don't need to increase this person's base by 10, 15% for them to feel like you care suddenly. Oftentimes, what are you doing to give them something that they probably would not give themselves, or something that they really enjoy that's personal to them? Experiences, for example. There's a great, one of the things that you can do, there's a great business that we've collaborated with that we've instituted in cannabis called Wishlist, where, if you meet certain benchmarks or KPIs, or if you've done very good at your job, or you were thorough, or you're great and you're a vibrant representation of the business when it comes to consumers coming through the door, you can give those people this platform by which they can have experiences. They can get tickets to a game. They can take their family out to dinner. Those sorts of small initiatives even though, we joke about it like, oh, those are kind of like, empty platitudes or like the shameless attempts at showing that you care, that sincerity goes a long way if it comes from a place of real care. It's true. Like it really, you have to be sincere about it. The biggest issue I would say with cannabis is the fact that these businesses go on such a trajectory so abruptly that you can go from 60 people to 600 people. It's hard to feel like you're being careful and thoughtful about the ways in which not you just enticing people with financial durability, but the way that you're thinking about their career trajectory. Again, it is a luxury for a lot of people to think about every single person in their organization, how they can best enable or equip them to be more successful and more oriented around the business. Training development, though, in cannabis is very absent for a host of reasons, one of which is there are only so many platforms that people trust in to train their folks on a recurring basis. Most of the time, it's internal. People create programming internally, like this is our way. This is the personalized stamp of this business to get people bought in and following this progress of them getting more skills on the job, more enablement, right? To get you for a larger dialogue, maybe in the open marketplace. So again, like I think it doesn't take a lot to find ways to galvanize your workforce, for make feel like you're being sincere and that they care about them. Because there's the three things that always turn people off, which is lack of communication, lack of career arc and trajectory and care. And then the last one is communication, right? Like when you don't have communication with people, they feel like they're spinning out. They have no idea whatsoever if they're even being thought of, let alone being successful.
Just want to reiterate to make sure that I understood correctly is that compensation isn't just about the financial aspect, right? There are perks outside of that can really make a difference. And some organizations may not think twice about it, let's say in a time frame, but they've grown from 60 people to 600 people. And those earlier employees who may not be on that same trajectory because of all the changes might make them feel not disgruntled as much, but reconsider their opportunities. And if competitors are using a different platform where they're giving out more perks, maybe lower comp, individuals may look to jump ship because they say, okay, like I tried here, it didn't work. I spoke to my manager. I'm going to go try in X, Y, and Z.
Right. Oftentimes, in our work specifically on the recruitment side is that story very often, which is I've been successful. I've plateaued. I've hit some kind of ceiling. I've been trying to find ways where I can affect change or maybe there's just not space for myself anymore. Maybe this is as far as I can go. Is there a way in which I can find more responsibility for myself? And it's like, well, you were, first, you were assistant general manager, then you were a bud tender, you were assistant general manager, then you were a GM. And then all of a sudden we see these people kind of jump into a regional or a VP. That's the thing that's really interesting about cannabis, which is your career acceleration is unbelievable. I mean, I've been a part of a lot of different industries. This is this space specifically, you can go from a hourly employee to a manager in a very short period of time, from a manager to a VP, EVP, even executive in a very short period of time that you really can't get access to outside industry. But because of that, what has to happen to get that acceleration? Oftentimes you have to leave. You have to find people who want to take your ideas, your know-how, and your willingness and give you the seat at the table that the business couldn't provide for you or didn't want you at. Sometimes businesses won't see you as valuable, as terrible and as awful as that can feel and be, or more importantly, they don't have the ability to see you whatsoever because they're so focused on the trajectory they're already on. So, oftentimes people that have these personality traits that are really growth oriented, that have these great skills, that learn them on the job, that want to, impress upon the executive members to give them the responsibility that they desperately want. They want to prove that their ideas can take flight. Sometimes there's no response. And they have to go to the open marketplace. And it's oftentimes, depending on which market they're in, the market will respond very, very willingly. So again, that's why we always talk about inequity as some place to tackle. Let's talk about not just pay. Let's talk about giving people responsibility, knowledge, know-how, experience, expertise. And it does not need to cost you more than you think. Matter of fact, sometimes it's perfectly free if you're willing to develop it. And you're willing to develop your people. If you're willing to do those sorts of things, you can have people that have long tenure in your business that trust the direction that you're in, even when it's not the right one. They will try to resolve those issues for you. Cannabis, it's hit or miss. Lots of businesses do that. They're great at it, but oftentimes they will miss the mark in some respect. Or people just want to put themselves on market. I got exposure to the best business I could find in proximity, right? There's no more opportunity here in Southern California Ohio is about to kick off. I'm originally from Cleveland. I'm going to go stake a claim, right? I'm going to take my roadshow. I'm going to take this circus and this expertise in this know-how, and also these all these cautionary tales. And I'm going to go over to this business. I'm going to build it a way in which I make sure that we don't have to come back to these obstacles again. We see that talent migration in cannabis is hardcore. People will up and find new opportunity domestically because of career mobility if they can't find it in their area. Absolutely.
That was you took the question out of my mouth. I was going to ask what is trending in terms of talent motion within the industry. If you see more individuals kind of jumping from company to company, or if you're seeing more individuals from outside the industry trying to get in. I also just want to note, I didn't see the whole movement from Southern California to Ohio, but it could be the next hot thing.
So that's the thing. So let's start with outside looking in.
Yeah.
For a second. If we had been talking about this years ago, the sheen on cannabis and the potential upside and the equity value and you know, it's not that people entirely misconstrued what cannabis was at that time. You know, it still holds a lot of promise and a lot of value. That's why we're all still in the game. Absolutely. You know, ultimately, this is a valuable thing. We're not wrong. We're just early type. Outside looking in now.
Promise.
Yeah, right. You gotta have a, right. You gotta laugh to keep from crying, right? I mean, the interesting thing about folks looking outside, looking in, is the macro climate feels kind of precarious, and a lot of people that be willing to take an attempt or to jump into a field where they don't know what it is from a business perspective, but there's a personal orientation around it. Usually, it's they smoke weed themselves, or a family member found a value through it, usually because they were sick or ill or debilitated. People outside cannabis looking in are a little bit more apprehensive for a host of reasons, one of which is we're not necessarily sure if the macro climate is going to go kablooey. I mean, even though the labor market itself is good and the economy is relatively healthy, the sentiment around both of those things are not, they're not matching that whatsoever. People are very pessimistic. And when you look at, the headlines, it doesn't take a genius to look at all the headlines associated with cannabis and see, a series of trials and tribulations of businesses that have come up and come back down, right? You see that time and time again where people are starting to get a little bit more educated, right, about what's going on from a commercial aspect before they enter the space. So a lot of these professionals are being a little bit more discerning before they take the leap in. Years ago, they thought it was easy riches. Every corner, no problem, no questions asked. It's going to play out. Now, much more discerning as a professional. Also, keep in mind, the educational arc. There are more resources, there are more universities, junior colleges, programs that are teaching cannabis on a recurring basis. And by virtue of that, having speaker series about people speaking to how challenging the environment is, people are being a little bit more thoughtful about the fact that these smart, incredibly sophisticated people inside the space are saying it's distressed, it's hard, it's challenging, it's much more complicated and complex than people give it credit for. So outside the space, people are being more apprehensive for a host of different reasons. Inside the space, it really is a question about where you are in your life. Are you a young parent? Do you have roots down, right? If you're up and moving to a new opportunity when these businesses can be kind of precarious, or they can be successful, but sometimes it's a short-lived success, or they're institutions overnight. Whatever the spectrum of outcome could potentially be, a lot of people, depending on what kind of skill and what kind of discipline, are also being really thoughtful. Because if you've been inside a cannabis business in any sense or fashion for long enough, you have to be a little bit more thoughtful about, well, what is this business giving me that I don't get where I currently am? The market I'm stepping into, what is it going to be like? If you told me a couple of years ago, Brian and I are from the East Coast, New York, being one of the largest cautionary tales that we've ever seen in terms of a rollout of a program and a marketplace, right? Years ago, I would have been like, this is great. This is amazing, right? It's going to be a layup. It's going to be so simplistic. It's, I made it as if like that market was going to be the one and only. It was going to be the only second to California, maybe. If that, probably would eclipse California. Still isn't up. Still isn't working. Still isn't functioning whatsoever. So again, a lot of professional expertise in cannabis is being thoughtful. They're being more mindful about the market dynamics, right? They're being much more mindful about the regulatory dynamics. They're also being really thoughtful about the larger political spectrum with scheduling and rescheduling, right? Like, does it make sense for me to make a move right now to a new marketplace when there's all this potential change in a larger broader holistic lens. How will that translate to the space that I'm in? Will that translate to the business I'm in? Because under rescheduling, in theory, cash flow should, because of 280, being out of the picture, cash flow should jump 15 to 30% for some of these businesses. Should I jump ship right now? Should I let it play? Should I take a flyer on an early stage business in Ohio before I don't know what Ohio is actually going to be? Again, I think there's a little bit more caution collectively. Absolutely, a lot more caution for sure.
We've seen a reemergence of unionization. Is that good for the industry, bad for the industry? Remains to be seen. Tell us about that.
Unions are not a good or bad thing, right? They are a tool for solidarity to lend voice to people who can't find one on their own, to create a collective voice for many. That's what a union does. I'm not anti-union. I'm pro-incentive. The idea should be that you take care of your people so well. Why would they need to look elsewhere for people to represent their interests? And, unions, the history, the backdrop of unions in America is really interesting because they were originally created first for crafts and then for industrialization. The idea really was predicated around safety, right? Don't get maimed at work, right? Labor abuse, children in coal mines, and compensation. Am I getting a fair living wage in, the American equation? Unionization is having a huge resurgence, macro and micro, in and out of cannabis. I mean, you probably have been reading about Starbucks, Amazon, the UAW, the UCFW, the Teamsters. We haven't seen this kind of coordinated effort in unionization in America in over 40 years, since like Reagan and Thatcher. Like it's been a long time since organized labor has been this active, this mobile, this loud. And one of the more pronounced parts of the conversation for businesses, large and small in America, right? Unionization in cannabis is interesting because the grievances, the issues that people are facing are the same ones that people face in outside industry, usually around pay. Most of the time when we have come across and worked alongside people that are approaching a unionization conversation or unions at large, or are entering into a conversation about incentive programming and thinking about what's the residual benefit if we do it right, what's the residual fault if we do it incorrectly, people paint unions as corrupt, problematic, and insincere, and more importantly, don't have the interests of people that are card-carrying members at heart. That's not true. Unions are trying in earnest to advocate and create change to represent people at a business where the business is not listening to them on an active and recurring basis. The thing that happens, though, when you unionize a business is it changes the complexion of trust. You have a union rep inside of the business who talks about issues on a recurring basis. When there is a fault or a problem inside a business, you go to your union rep first that talks to the greater union about how it can be changed, if it can be changed whatsoever. So it's not a problematic thing. It's a natural byproduct of an industry that is akin to retail, hospitality, right? Like this is a natural byproduct of this industry becoming much more formalized and much more similar to outside industry. So this is a natural experience of most of a maturation process for most of these kinds of businesses. The thing I would say that's really interesting about cannabis is the fact that, to your point earlier, Brian, it's like a number of intersecting disciplines, right? Like, can a union that has always represented people in retail, do they know, not do they have the interests of people at heart, but do they really know that they're asking for concessions from a business that only has so much money to begin with, right? Are they negotiating for these businesses to give more of something that they don't have? And that's where I try to have more of a dialogue with all of these stakeholders, which is, you're trying to bleed a stone. You're trying to get more money and more concessions from a business that only has so much to give up. Their best effort is not a grievance that they're trying to perpetuate. They only can give this workforce that wants to unionize so much. And there's limitations to what they can give. That's why the creativity piece about trying to solve for inequity is fascinating and fun for me, because there are ways to solve for these issues that don't require collective bargaining. But in the instance when you do have unionization, it changes the complexion of a business. When you unionize a business, the way things are handled, employee handbooks, the way that things are conferred to management, the way things that people are resolving issues on a recurring basis, you have someone else entering the conversation. Full stop. And a lot of these founders and early executives and members, because of the fact that unions have not been representative of larger industry for quite some time, they are unfamiliar with this terrain. So I think this is not just a natural byproduct of an industry coming into its own grips with its own self-identity. I also think it's the fact that unions themselves have to have contemporary understanding of what these cannabis businesses are, what they can provide, and also the distress that sometimes they're in. So I think that there's got to be like this education on both parts. You need to have the executive team or management get acclimated to what unionization means and how it changes. And for unions to understand inherently what these businesses do, what they are, what they can provide, and most importantly, what the staff needs in order to be successful. Other than just giving them an extra 50 cents to 75 cents an hour, what are some of the other things that can be requested or required or provided by a business to make sure that it's a better environment?
Unionization doesn't affect all of this fragmented market equally, right? Like it's only going to affect the larger organizations that unionization is adopted within their employee population, correct?
No, you can unionize a single store or 2-3 stores. It doesn't have to be an institution or a pubco or an MSO to be unionized. Anyone can. Anyone that wants to be a card-carrying member to have representation and contractual agreements as a group can go to a union, speak to a union, have the union represent them in those negotiations. Anybody. Full stop.
Thank you. I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
I think sometimes, exactly like you said, Mike, it gets like a bad rap for it. And I think when people come together from a union, you see other people come to their defense and say, hey, so-and-so company is trying to end this union or prevent them from unionizing, when maybe it should be, hey, so-and-so company doesn't have the compensation available, or there's other challenges internally that might limit them from allowing X, Y, and Z. Because if they do agree with certain things, maybe then they have to do layoffs because they can't afford certain employees. And I think that is the good give and take balance that becomes so complicated. And my response to the people on the internet that usually scream at that is that they haven't had to make hard decisions yet, right? If you're saying, hey, so-and-so company should just do it, they've got money, A, you don't know that. And B, sometimes if you push in one direction, you get pulled back in another, which is not really what everyone wants.
Right. I think that's a really good point, Brian. I think the idea is there an active dialogue or a decision just being made, right? Like, I think the idea of educating everyone in this process progressively is really, really important. I think unions need to have a contemporary understanding of what cannabis is and is not. I think business owners in cannabis need to get acclimated to what unions really do, right? What they're there to do, what they're trying to do. I think there is a big divide because both groups are inexperienced with one another. Full stop. They're both experienced with one another. So assumptions are made. And most importantly, the idea is almost like there's a natural mistrust or distrust of each other. I think the better thing to say is let's learn about what this business is trying to accomplish and the staff in it. So when we come to a bargaining opportunity, we're representing them, but we have all of the facts and the details and the ideas of what this business is. And then for management to understand what unions can accomplish and what they can do. Not that they're not there to hinder a business. They're there to give voice to people when there was no response, right? Unionization just doesn't crop up. Usually it's because workforce is disenchanted in some shape or fashion.
I have a question, but it's going to completely pivot the conversation.
Do what you got to do.
Oh, yeah.
Is there like a single skill gap that's missing within the industry that you think would benefit the industry as a whole right now in terms of individuals?
I don't know if it's a skill gap, but I don't see a lot of forensic accountants. The mechanics of these businesses, we talked a little bit before we jumped on about just like, if you really looked at the EINs, just like the tree of ownership and operation, I am blown away at how accountants would want to sign up to kind of orchestrate the symphony of the financial durability of this business moving in tandem, but not. I think forensic accounting would be really interesting. Honestly, there's not a singular ERP system. I'd be really curious about data. There are no data scientists that I know of in the space. I know people that work with and create data. I don't know that many people that parse data on a recurring basis. We have like 5 economists. Economists are the unsexiest group of people in the world, but they're pivotal. They're kind of like our soothsayers. I don't know. It's interesting because every time I think that there's a gap from a specific skill, someone at that business, because everyone's pretty much a utility player, is able to, in a way, kind of just enough cover that gap. Like, that's the thing. Usually, some of these people have the personality traits of taking on so much responsibility that they figure it out. These are hardcore entrepreneurs. People in cannabis are hardcore entrepreneurs. So if there were considerable gaps, most of the people are trying to address them, right? Like as a community. That's a great question. I have to mull it over. I have to come back to that, honestly, because most of the time when we've seen people address these gaps, in a way, they're able to address them just enough. But forensic accounting, I'd be really curious because the books, I mean, you see restatements and you see, the financial performance of these businesses be wholly incorrect. I would say that would be an opportunity to actually have someone from the get-go make sure that the numbers are accurate on a recurring basis. Yeah, that would be interesting. I don't see too many forensic accountants.
You hear accounting referred to as creative accounting. And in my experience, I never knew accounting could be considered creative. I wish I could have used that back in college.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Creative accounting. I mean, I don't know. That's a stretch.
Talk to us about the event at MJBiz. I know it's a big event. It's attended by a ton of people. Tell us about the value and kind of the purpose of it.
Oh, yeah. So it's an HR summit. Obviously, the nicest group of people you're going to find, right? Like people in HR departments are just lovely. The idea really is to bring together not just like human resource people, but like resources for humans. So it's not just a conversation about the roles themselves, but the skill sets, the mindsets. HR people are great because they're probably people that create the most contemporary ideas and versions of workforce development in America. HR is like the most important yet least used group of people just everywhere. So our thought was, why don't we get these groups together, these people, most of them are lovely, and talk about specifically how we're creating standards and practices and how we're providing that to a developing workforce, a younger workforce too, who have different expectations. So it's at MJBiz, probably like 4 or 5 hours. There will be some light consumption, I assume, but the idea really is to bring together chief people officers at every size and stature. And also we love, it's like the senior squad and then like the freshman class. Our idea always is to have that perfect melding of expertise that's been in market for some time. And we always try to invite as many people as we can from new and emerging marketplaces. So we already invited a lot of people from Ohio, Missouri, New York. We want to bring those people in because contemporary HR practices are contemporary cannabis practices, enabling this next generation coming up. Hopefully we can start to either solve for or try to diminish the obstacles. That's the idea and the attempt. It'll probably be, if I was a betting man, probably like 150 to 250 people, give or take.
What question do you wish more people asked you?
What's your why? What are you doing it for? What's driving you for a space that, from our conversation, it's like, it's obviously challenging and not without its faults. What's driving you to do this type of work? And I mean, for me, it's very simplistic. I want to know that I used this one career that I had to build something that wasn't there, that a lot of future generations will probably know never how hard we had to work for or strive for to build it. But I want to sit there and say that I was there to build it when it was barely an idea. We always had weed, but we started creating parameters around it. I want to say that I was kind of responsible in adding that a little bit. Outside of cannabis, question I want to ask, why are you such a good cook? Like, where did that come from? I don't know. I'm just kidding. Cal, you're falling off your chair. You're laughing.
Dream smoking session, 3 people, dead or alive.
Man, dead or alive?
Dead or alive.
Oh, baby. You know what? I don't know why, but Dolly Parton she's just on my list because she just seems great. I think if I smoked weed with her, I feel like we would have a hell of a good time. Robin Williams, that's a layup. I'd laugh my ass off nonstop all the time. He did cocaine, but I think we would enjoy weed together. And the last person, probably like a chef, like Marcus Samuelson or like Thomas Keller, because after we got booted, they would probably whip something together pretty tasty. So yeah, that's selfish, but yeah, those would be my 3 folks.
You were the first person to think through the process and understand a meal was needed after.
I thought the chef was so that he could have a cook-off so you could show him how much better.
Oh, I like it.
No, not him. No, sir. I'm like, I'm not going to fight you in that one, man. But yeah, that would be a fun crew. But what about you guys? Wait. You've been asking all this is bullshit. You guys, what's your 1, 2, 3?
You want to go first, Colin, or me?
You can go first.
Mine would be Derek Jeter.
Nice.
Kobe Bryant. And World Wide West.
Nice. Good group. Great group. You thought about that.
I mean, I asked the question, so for sure I've thought about it a few times.
Probably be like Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla, And then the third one is tough, right? Maybe like
Elon Musk.
maybe Elon or like Epictetus, right? Or like Marcus Aurelius. You know what I mean? I feel like it'd be a wild conversation. You know, you get like 5,000 years of like, you know, you're touching like different points throughout history, you know?
Man, that was on my desk when you said that, you know?
Oh, hey, it's stoicism.
Nikola Tesla, I don't know. If he smoked weed, I mean, like,
Just imagine that.
I don't think he was a human, by the way.
That's why I want to talk to him.
Okay.
So,
Like, that's why we need to smoke.
To confirm
hey,
it.
like we're still wiring electricity, Rob. Can you believe it? 100 years later.
Can you help us?
Like, he had like a weather machine in his safe when he died. You know what I mean? Like, Jesus. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, Mike, for those who want to get in touch, they want to learn more, where can they find you?
Oh, easy peasy. It's flowerhire.com. It's Mike at FlowerHire. Small but mighty. We're a plucky upstart. And then most importantly, and I mean this sincerely, LinkedIn, if you reach out, if you're interested about geeking out about cannabis, if you want to talk about your career trajectory in or out of the space, we are open to it. We love having conversations about what that means and how it translates into the space. And most importantly, for everyone out there that wants to get connected to other people in the space from a mentorship perspective, I think that's probably the best way for people that are listening to this outside the space to get involved actively in the space without the risk. If you want to get introduced to people who are operators to understand really boots on the ground, what is happening, what this involves, and what it takes, love to connect you. And by the way, they would love to speak to you.
Awesome. We'll link it on the show notes. Thanks for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This was great. Appreciate it. Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks, Mike.